One signature, that's all it took. One pen stroke and my own son erased me from my house. At 75, I thought I was signing a simple medical form, but the truth was sharper. I had just signed away my home and my freedom to a nursing home I never chose. The home I built with Martha, my late wife, dollar by dollar, was stolen in seconds by my own blood. What would you do if your child erased you with a single signature comment below? Because for me, this was only the beginning of a betrayal that would tear my family apart. The night before, they called it rehab, but it was a burial with paperwork instead of dirt. The night before they drove him out, William walked the house like a watchman finishing his rounds. He straightened the framed photo of Martha in her wedding dress, smoothed the wrinkled runner on the dining table, and pressed his palm to the kitchen doorframe where pencil marks still measured his son's growth. 1979, 1981, 1983. Little notches like steps up a ladder he'd built for the boy to climb. The refrigerator hummed, the porch swing ticked softly against its chain. He could almost hear Martha's voice in the quiet. Turn off the lamp, Will. Leave the hall light for luck. He left it on. He tried to eat, but the soup cooled untouched. He would not call what he felt fear. Teachers don't tell students they're afraid of exams. He called it caution, an old habit of minds trained to read footnotes before headlines. The doctor had said, rest. The daughter-in-law had said, rehab. His son had said, just a couple of weeks, Dad. 3 words, 3 registers, all pointing in the same direction. Still, some small part of him kept inventory, front door locked, mail stacked, roses watered. If this was a couple of weeks, the house should not be left to guess. A knock sounded, 2 quick, 1 soft. His son's pattern since childhood. William opened the door to Michael's familiar shoulders and the clean smell of office starch. Behind him, Victoria's perfume arrived, first citrus polished into something sharper. Michael didn't step in right away. He glanced past his father's shoulder into the dark hall, as if the house itself might object. Morning, Dad, Michael said. You ready? For what exactly? William asked. He knew the answer, but he wanted to hear the word chosen. Rehab, Victoria said brightly, as if a ribbon would be pinned on him at the end. Doctor thinks a little rest with physical therapy will be wonderful for your balance. I don't need wonderful, William said. I need my own bed. Victoria's smile didn't move her eyes. Beds are everywhere. Safety isn't. Michael touched William's elbow the same way he had as a boy when he wanted a second cookie without asking. 2 weeks, he said. We made sure it's the good place. Private room, window. You'll like it. William studied his son the way he used to study a restless student before a test. Is this nerves or something else? Michael's tie was straight. His jaw worked when it didn't need to. Say what you mean, William thought. Michael didn't. He left a note on the table, trash Thursday. Mrs. Klein will walk the roses if needed and lock the door. The jingle of keys felt louder than it should. As they walked to the car, the porch swing knocked its soft rhythm like a metronome, keeping time for a song no one was singing. The streets were familiar. The oak that split the sidewalk on Maple, the church with the stubborn bell, the bakery that still burned the first tray every morning. William counted landmarks the way a sailor reads buoys, proof he was still near shore. Victoria drove. Michael sat in the back beside his father, too close and somehow too far. Dad. Michael said, we packed a small bag, pajamas, toothbrush, the book you like about the battles of '63. Antietam, William said. The book is about Antietam. Right, Michael said, smiling too fast. I remember the map pages. Do you? William asked, not unkindly. Victoria filled the car with information. 3 meals a day, dietary options, a real therapy gym. There's bingo on Tuesdays and a lecture series on Thursdays. You love lectures. She laughed lightly at her own joke. Lectures are for people who plan to leave smarter, William said, not for people who plan to stay. Traffic slowed at the turnoff. A green sign announced Maplewood Nursing and Rehabilitation. The paint shone newer than the building behind it. The word nursing sat on the line like a thumb on a scale. William felt the old instinct to correct the sentence, to sand a word until it matched its meaning. He said nothing, and cataloged details instead. A flag at half-mast, a custodian sweeping leaves from the ramp, a bird nest tucked into the O of wood, where someone hadn't thought to check. Inside, the air smelled like lemon, and something faintly metallic. A young nurse at the desk looked up, and for a heartbeat her face softened, the quick human kind of softness that happens before training remembers itself. "Welcome," she said. "You must be Mir Harris." "William," he said. He preferred to stay on a first-name basis with people who might speak for him when he wasn't there to edit. Victoria stepped forward, purse already open to the pocket where forms live. "We're here for the short rehabilitation program. We called ahead. You have the paperwork." "Of course," the nurse said. "We'll get you settled." The word dropped again. Settled, like dust in a room that hasn't been aired. They followed a volunteer down a corridor where nameplates were taped at slight angles beside doorframes. Someone had tried to cheer the hall with paper flowers and a calendar stuck permanently on. June activities. Though the outside world was clearly October, a television murmured a game show to nobody. A woman in a wheelchair nodded as they passed and then looked down at her hands as if the nod had cost her something. "Private room, you said?" William murmured. "Yes," Victoria said. "Cozy." The room had a window on the parking lot and a dresser that pretended to be wood. The bedsheets were white in a way that only machines can make them. Someone had placed a single plastic cup on the tray table like an offering that forgot its purpose. Michael opened the blinds. Sunlight fell in the wrong way. Too square, too obedient. "It won't be forever," he said, keeping his voice gentle. 2 weeks and you'll be stronger. Strength is not the problem, William said, tapping his temple lightly. Memory is not the problem either, Dad, Michael said, and the word carried a request William couldn't parse. "Trust me. Don't ask. Please don't make me say it out loud." A clipboard arrived, schedules, meal preferences, consent forms with tidy boxes that expect tidy signatures. The nurse asked questions that sound kind until you hear them twice. Any falls, any pain, anyone at home with you. Victoria answered before William could, fabricating warmth with speed. Michael signed his own name on a responsible party line. William's eyes slowed on the page, not to read. He had learned to read long ago, but to let the paper admit what it was trying not to say. He looked up at the nurse. "Do you wear different wristbands here?" he asked. "I saw yellow on the gentleman by the TV." "Yes," she said. "Yellow is for short-term rehab. And white?" he asked. "White is for long-term care," she said, then caught herself and added too quickly, "which is not what we're doing here." "Of course not," Victoria said, bright as a bell. "Just rehab." The nurse's gaze flicked to Michael and back to William. That same small human softness returned for a second. "We'll just get your vitals," she said. "You can rest while we print your packet." William sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress gave uneasily, like a handshake that doesn't want to commit. He set his cane against the nightstand and placed Martha's photograph on the tray table beside the plastic cup. The photo looked both right and wrong in the room, as if he had smuggled an honest witness into a place that preferred hearsay. "Dad," Michael said, "I'll bring the mail by OK," and the neighbor offered to keep an eye on the place. "I have kept an eye on that place for 50 years, William said. "It knows the difference." Victoria's phone buzzed. She stepped into the hall to answer, voice pitched low and professional. Michael watched her with the same expression he used to wear when a ball rolled into the street wanting to run, remembering not to. William folded his hands and breathed the way he had taught anxious students to breathe before exams: in for 4, hold for 4, out for 6. In the silence between counts, he heard the building speak, the clack of a cartwheel with a flat spot, the hiss of a door that didn't quite seal the TV laugh track, unwilling to admit defeat. Familiarity failed to arrive. He tried again. The nurse returned with a thin band coiled like a question mark. "Just for identification," she said. "Everyone wears one. What color is mine?" William asked. "Yellow," she said, and held it up to show him. It was yellow. He nodded as she wrapped it around his wrist and fastened the plastic clasp. The band was light. The word printed on it, "Rehab," was heavy. Victoria reappeared, all smiles. "See, easy," she said. "Let's get you some rest and then we'll handle the boring stuff." "Boring stuff," William repeated as if trying on the phrase to see if it fit. In his classroom, nothing that changed a grade had ever been boring. In his life, nothing that could change a home would be either. Michael looked relieved, as if the hardest part, a threshold crossed, a goodbye postponed, had already happened. He patted the dresser and said, "We'll come back with your slippers." He didn't say, "tomorrow." He didn't say, "I promise." Those were words for boys. Men avoid them when they're not sure which ones they can keep. The nurse adjusted the blinds 1/2, just enough to make the light kind. "Lunch is at noon," she said. "Roast chicken today." "Is it really?" William asked, hearing Martha's voice again. "We can make a meal out of less." He nodded. "Thank you." They left him with the window and the white sheets and the yellow band. He listened to their footsteps walking away together and told himself they would turn back for something they forgot: the umbrella, the parking ticket, the way home. The footsteps didn't turn. He picked up the photograph of Martha and angled it toward the light. "You'd tell me if I was being foolish," he said softly. The photo had already answered 100 questions. It chose to keep its silence now. William set it down and reached for the small notebook he carried in his jacket. He wrote the date, the time, the word admission, and underlined it once. He didn't know yet why he needed a record. He knew only that records remember what people later pretend not to. From the hall, a voice said, "Mrs. Lang, Victoria's maiden name." Another voice answered, "Yes, I'm here." The sound moved away. William closed his eyes for a count of 4 and opened them into the same square light. Have you ever given your whole life to your children only to feel abandoned when you needed them most? Share your story in the comments. A volunteer passed the doorway pushing a library cart with 3 paperbacks and a puzzle box missing its lid. The cart rattled. One wheel complained the way old floors do. William stood carefully, set his palm on the window, and watched a sparrow hop along the curb at the edge of the lot. It darted indecisive, then found a tiny seam in the hedge and slipped through to the other side. He watched the greenery settle over the hole it left and thought, exits are easier to find before someone closes the page. He sat back down, smoothed the bedsheet, and waited for the boring stuff to introduce itself. The old man's mind drifted back, as it often did when the present grew unbearable. The sterile smell of the nursing home hallways faded, replaced by the sweeter scent of chalk dust and paper. He was 23 again, standing in front of a blackboard. His tie was crooked, his hair still dark, and his eyes burned with the fire of a young teacher determined to change lives. He remembered the rows of desks, the restless students tapping their pencils, and the way his voice steadied when he realized they were actually listening. He wasn't just teaching history or literature, he was teaching them how to think, how to fight for themselves in a world that didn't give out favors. It was in those years that he met Martha. She wasn't one of his students, never that. But she came to the school library every afternoon to help tutor younger kids. He remembered the first time he saw her bent over a book, her auburn hair catching the sunlight from the window. She looked up, and their eyes met with the kind of spark that novels always promised, but real life rarely delivered. When they married, it wasn't in a cathedral or a grand ballroom. It was in a modest church with wooden pews and a choir that sang off-key, but with heart. He slipped the gold band onto her finger, his hands shaking, and she laughed through her tears. They promised each other forever, and unlike so many others, they meant it. Over time, the house grew into a home. They planted roses in the backyard, Martha's pride and joy. They saved pennies in a jar until they could buy a second-hand piano, which she learned to play just enough to fill the evenings with music. Every corner of that house became a monument to their shared labor, their laughter, and their stubborn refusal to let hardship define them. And then their son was born. He remembered the night vividly, the storm outside rattling the windows, the rush to the hospital, the first wail that cut through the air. He held that tiny bundle in his arms and thought, I will give you everything I never had. He kept that promise. When money ran short, he took on extra tutoring, stayed late at the school, and even worked summers at the library. He patched his shoes rather than buy new ones. Also, his son could have fresh notebooks, decent clothes, and eventually the chance at college. Vacations. They never had them. The idea of Disneyland or road trips was out of reach. Instead, he and Martha turned weekends into adventures, picnics by the river, baseball games in the park, fishing trips with a single rod shared between father and son. His boy never complained. He only laughed and asked questions about everything. Those were the moments that mattered. Those were the moments he thought would last forever. Years passed. His son grew tall, his voice deepening, his world expanding beyond the small town. Graduation day came and the old man stood in the bleachers clapping until his hands hurt. Martha cried beside him, clutching his arm, whispering, "We did it. We gave him wings." But wings meant distance. College took his son far away, and though the old man was proud, the house felt emptier with each semester. He wrote letters, sent care packages, and always ended with the same words. "Remember where you come from. Remember we love you." The memory blurred. The smell of antiseptic crept back into his nostrils, but he pushed it away, forcing his mind further into the past. He remembered the day Martha fell ill. It started with fatigue, then faint spells, then the endless string of doctor's visits. He sat beside her hospital bed night after night, reading aloud from her favorite books. He cooked when she had no appetite, coaxing her to take even one bite. When she finally passed, the world collapsed. The funeral was simple, like their wedding had been. Friends filled the church, and he stood at the front staring at the photograph of her in her wedding dress. His hands trembled, gripping the sides of the podium. "I promised her forever," he said. "And though she is gone, I will still keep that promise." Afterward, standing alone in their bedroom, he clutched her wedding ring in his palm until it left an imprint. He whispered into the silence, "I will never leave this house, Martha. I will keep it safe for you, for him." "It's charming," she had said, running a manicured finger along the banister. "These older homes have potential." Martha would have laughed and said, "Potential for what, a broken ankle on these stairs." But Martha wasn't there to deflect. The old man smiled politely and set another plate on the table. "Do you keep documents in a safe place?" she asked one afternoon while his son was in the backyard checking the gutters. "You know, just in case." "In the desk," he said, then felt suddenly foolish for answering. He cleared his throat. Why the old man had spent a lifetime trusting what people said. He taught students to believe in argument, in evidence, in the good faith of discourse. It hadn't prepared him for smiling questions with hidden hooks. Then the hospital incident happened, the fainting spell in the grocery store, the ambulance's blare, the short stay for observation. The doctor recommended rest and mentioned rehabilitation as a possibility, and the old man nodded, too tired to argue. He didn't see the look that passed between his son and daughter-in-law. He didn't hear the phone calls afterward, didn't see the browser tabs open to nursing homes, didn't know that Zillow listings for classic single family with great bones were suddenly B. And then one afternoon, she asked the question he had forgotten until now, the one that ricocheted in his head as he stared at the nameplates lining the nursing home corridor. "Do you have a power of attorney set up?" she had said, stirring too much sugar into her coffee. Her question felt harmless at the time, but now it echoed like a hidden dagger waiting for the right moment. "It's smart to designate someone, you know, in case." He remembered a day near the anniversary of Martha's passing when the daughter-in-law arrived with a clipboard. "We should organize your documents," she announced brightly. "Streamline." She used the word like a broom. He resisted, but his son put a hand on his shoulder and said, "Let her help Dad." Back in the fluorescent hallway, the old man felt the tug of time again. If Martha had been here, she would have sensed it sooner, this current pulling him away from shore. She would have raised her chin and told them no. She would have laughed that ringing laugh and said, "We're not for sale. Are you all right, sir?" she asked quietly. Her eyes dropped to his wristband. "If you're here for short-term rehab, they usually give a yellow band. Yours is white." She glanced over her shoulder, lowered her voice. "White means long-term care." The word struck him like a bell. Long-term. He tasted metal in his mouth. "There must be a mistake," he said. He wanted to thank her. Instead, he remembered how to breathe. "My what?" He stepped closer. The signature lines had his name printed beneath them. His name, his address, his date of birth. The signatures themselves looked like a drunk imitation of his hand. She widened her eyes. "Oh, Dad, you must be confused. We processed this after your hospital visit. You said you wanted help." Settled. He thought of dust settling on a closed piano lid. He thought of the roses bending after the first frost. He thought of Martha's ring on his finger and the photograph that always sat on the mantel. He tightened his grip on the cane until the admission office hummed with ordinary noises. Printers, a copier lid, a TV down the hall. The old man stood at the counter while a clerk in a gray cardigan paged through a file without looking up. "We have your long-term admission in order," she said, tapping the packet. "Everything's already signed. We just need your acknowledgement that you've arrived." "My acknowledgement?" he asked. "I haven't signed anything." His daughter-in-law stepped closer. "Dad, remember?" After the hospital scare, we agreed by phone and e-sign. You said it would be easier. A young nurse at a side desk glanced over. Her voice was careful. If you're here for short-term rehab, sir, the band is usually yellow. Her eyes dropped to his wrist. Yours is white. White is long-term. There's a mistake, he said. The words steadied him. The clerk rotated the packet so he could see his name and birth date correct. A signature that looked like his but not quite the pressure wrong. A notary stamp tilted. A second page repeated the stamp, same day, same slant. This isn't mine, he said. And the notary, what is the commission number? She read it to him. A marginal note caught his eye. Call-in verification, voice shaky but consistent with age, background noise inconsistent with hospital setting. He had been under observation that afternoon. The hospital in the note had been guessed not heard. Dad, the daughter-in-law said brightly, you've been through a lot. Let's get you settled first. She signaled to an orderly. Valuables go to the lockbox. Facility policy, the orderly said, for resident safety. He reached for the ring, the gold band the old man had worn since he'd placed it on Martha's finger. It slid off with a betrayal softness, sealed into an envelope logged with date and time. A young staff member hesitated with the clipboard. He seems unsure, she whispered. Victoria leaned forward, her voice firm but sweet. He doesn't understand what he's signing. That's why I'm here. Just let me handle it. William's chest burned. He wasn't confused, he was erased. Policy stole my wife's photograph faster than any thief could. The orderly reached for the ring, the gold band William had worn since the day Martha slipped it on his finger. It slid off too easily, the soft betrayal of skin grown thin with age. He felt the air close over the empty space, colder than the fluorescent light above. That ring has been on my hand longer than you've been alive, he said, voice steady, though his chest shook. Victoria tilted her head, eyes glossy with practiced sympathy. Then maybe it's time to let it rest for your safety. She dropped the envelope into the lockbox with a crisp snap, sealing away half a century in one motion. The orderly's hand moved toward the photograph of Martha that William had set on the tray. William caught it first, pulling it against his chest. Not this, he whispered. She stays with me. Policy requires valuables be logged. Victoria pressed her smile, lacquered tight. She is not a policy. William snapped louder than he intended. His son flinched, eyes darting to the floor. The clerk hesitated, eyes flicking to the nurse, then back to William. The photograph remained in his grip, but the damage was done. The empty band of skin on his finger throbbed like an open wound. William opened his notebook with shaking hands. He wrote one line beneath the forged signature he had already copied. They tried to take Martha today. The words bled heavy through the paper, ink pressing into the page below, as if he wanted history itself to remember. To William, it wasn't just gold. It was his marriage, his memories with Martha stolen in silence. The pen scratched. Something inside him did too. The daughter-in-law lifted the framed photo of Martha. We'll move this to his room, she told the orderly, as if kindness were a form of control. A phone buzzed in her purse. She angled away, speaking low. Yes, the owner is transitioning to a nursing facility, she said. Classic single-family original hardwood, great bones, quick close possible. She turned back with a smile already arranged. Nothing you need to worry about, Dad. He looked at the clerk. I want copies of all of this, he said, tapping the packet, and the notary details. The clerk's eyes flicked to the nurse. I can print them, she said at last. You're entitled to copies. The nurse approached the counter as if rearranging clipboards. She slid a small sticky note to the edge, her hand hiding the motion. A room number, a name. Ms. Keller, a patient advocate. Hours, sir. She said softly, you have the right to ask for a review before any room assignment. You can refuse long-term placement today. He nodded. I want to speak to the advocate. The clerk hesitated. The daughter-in-law didn't. Of course, she said, sweet and sharp. Whatever gives you peace of mind. While they waited, the daughter-in-law drifted to the alcove by the vending machines. The nurse followed with her eyes. The old man heard fragments numbers, the authoritative rhythm of verification. Yes, social ending in 2391, the daughter-in-law said into her phone. Date of birth, March 17th. Mailing address is the same. This is his authorized agent. We have a power of attorney on file. A pause. We need to move funds for care. The old man stared at the white band and felt time narrow. The nurse's jaw tightened. She looked like someone watching a glass slide off a table in slow motion, too far to catch it close enough to witness the shatter. Mini CTA. If you were in his place, would you stay silent and hope for the best or stand up and fight back? Let us know below. Ms. Keller arrived with a legal pad and steadiness. I'm Rebecca Keller, patient advocate, she said, taking a seat beside him. You requested a review. I did, the old man said. He pointed to his wrist. I came for short-term rehab, if anything. I did not consent to long-term placement, and I never signed these. He slid the copies to her. Please read the notary note. Keller scanned fast. White band is long-term, she confirmed. She circled the notary commission number, the phrase, voice shaky, the line about background noise, inconsistent with hospital. We take consent seriously, she said. I'm placing a hold on room assignment until this is clarified. She dialed compliance on speaker, stated the hold, and read the note verbatim. The room seemed to breathe for the first time. The daughter-in-law returned, face smooth. We're all on the same side, she said. He needs care. Keller nodded without agreeing. Care includes consent, she said, and documentation that stands up. She looked at the clerk. Please print the notary details, intake notes, and property log. The ring goes back to the owner upon discharge. It's logged? The clerk said, cheeks coloring. He can retrieve it at discharge, good, Keller said. She glanced at the band. May I? She produced a small pair of scissors but stopped. I'll cut it when the hold is in the chart. She turned to the old man. If anyone asks you to sign or initial anything, call me back immediately. The printer chattered. The old man collected the pages, commission number, timestamps, the phrase, call-in verification. He took out his small notebook and wrote a line, I did not consent. He underlined it twice. Keller's hold email landed within minutes, subject, admission status, hold pending review. The clerk printed it and slid it across with both hands. Keller read the first line into the room, then lifted a small pair of scissors. Now it's in your chart, she said, and snipped the white band. The plastic curled into her palm like a shed skin. Annotate the record, Keller told the clerk. Long-term placement on hold, no transport without consent, note case number. She wrote it on the top copy in block letters and turned to the old man. If anyone asks you to sign or initial anything, call me first. The daughter-in-law stepped into the corridor, voice pitched low into her phone. When she returned, her smile was all lacquer. To her husband, she said a little too loudly, the bank wants the original signature card. I'll drive to the safe deposit box. Keller met the old man's eyes. Do you want to go home pending review? Yeah, he said. You have that right, she replied. Give me 30 minutes for discharge. She paused, then added, document everything. He had already started. He photographed the forged signature, the tilted stamp, the call-in verification note, the envelope with his ring, the property log. He took one more shot of his wrist before and after, so that any future argument would have to step around the proof already on paper. His son sat beside him, elbows on knees. Dad, he said to the floor, I'm sorry for believing easier meant better. The young man's voice thinned. I thought I could make everything smooth and easier for whom, the old man asked gently. The son swallowed and nodded. I'm with you, he said. That's the choice I should have made earlier. Keller came back with a folder and a new firmness. The hold is live, she said. Compliance is requesting the notary's journal entry. If the entry or stamp is off, the document fails. I've flagged your chart, no long-term billing without in-person consent verified by a neutral witness. I also opened an adult protective services intake. They may loop a detective. She looked to the daughter-in-law. We'll need the original POA. It's in the safe deposit box, the daughter-in-law said smoothly. We'll return tomorrow. Bring it here, Keller replied. Do not email a cropped photo. The clerk arrived with discharge papers. Pending review, she read softly as if to convince herself. She placed the property envelope on the counter. Ring to be retrieved by owner. The orderly who had logged it now set it down with both hands, the way people handle something they finally understand matters. They walked past the vending machine and the family lounge, whose sitcom laugh track could not fill the hallway. A room had a nameplate ready for him, his in block letters slid into plastic. He took a photo, timestamp visible. I was here. He did not speak it. The act said enough. At the sliding doors, the young nurse waited with a small wave, the kind risk gives to courage. "You have my number," she said. "Call if anyone pressures you." "Thank you," he told her. Gratitude landed in his voice like steadiness. September light lay soft on the parking lot. He folded into the passenger seat, the folder on his knees. Martha's photograph on top, like I wasn't confused. I was betrayed. I taught my students that history is built on primary sources. Now, my life depended on becoming one. That night, the house did what houses do after a storm had settled. Pipes clicked. The refrigerator hummed, the porch swing outside tapped a soft rhythm against its chain. The old man moved through the rooms he and Martha had built, turning off lamps the way a sailor trims sails before darkness. He was not sleepy. He was not restless. He was measuring the distance between panic and a plan. He set the folder on the dining table and opened it like a book he had graded for years. Exhibit A. The copy of a signature that looked almost like his, but not quite, too rushed at the tail, too heavy at the H. Exhibit B. A notary seal stamped at an angle that no patient hand would accept. Exhibit C. The note that said, "Call in verification," with a line about background noise that guessed its way into fiction. He drew a small check mark beside each and whispered the same sentence he had used in 100 classrooms. Details aren't decoration. They are the thing. His house was a fortress of memory, and that forged paper had been a silent bullet aimed to take it all away. Mini CTA. Do you believe silence is a form of a strength or a sign of weakness? Tell us what you think. "I know," he said to her. "It's a lot." On the table beside him lay the white plastic band Keller had cut, curled now into a crescent, harmless, like a snake's shed skin. He picked it up and turned it between his fingers. The band had not been heavy. The weight came from the word printed on it in tidy block letters, "Resident." Someone had tried to turn a title into a cage. He set the band down and, almost without thinking, placed his empty ring finger on the table beside it. He took out his notebook and wrote the day's facts in clear lines. He underlined Keller's name. He underlined the nurses. He wrote, "Never sign under pressure," and then smiled at himself because he had told generations of students the same thing about tests, about contracts, about any moment when a clock tried to do the thinking for them. His phone buzzed on the table, the kind of buzz that tries to be polite. A text from his son. "Home." He typed, "Yes," and then added, "We're okay," because he had learned that sometimes the person apologizing needs the person wronged to say it out loud first. A second text. "I'll come by in the morning." He typed, "Bring coffee," and hit send. It was a joke small enough to fit in a pocket, but it was the kind of joke you tell when you want someone to know they still belong on your porch. He thought about forgiveness the way he thought about stepladders, useful, dangerous, if you climb too fast. Forgiveness would be a decision he made when he could make it without wobbling. Tonight, he chose clarity. He repeated the 3 goals Hart had named on the phone: stop the sale void, the authority, protect the person, and the money. He had been a teacher long enough to know that writing goals on paper makes them harder to ignore. He wrote them again on an index card and taped it to the edge of the folder like a flag. He stood and walked to the front door. The lock turned with the familiar voice of metal against metal. He checked it twice, not because he was afraid of the dark, but because the last hours had taught him that doors close best when you choose to close them. He looked out through the narrow window at the porch swing Martha had insisted they keep, even after the chains rusted. He had oiled those chains last spring. They did not complain now. He almost laughed when he realized he had kept that promise to a piece of furniture more faithfully than his family had kept theirs to him. On the wall opposite the mantel hung the framed class photo from his last year, teaching faces arranged in 3 rows, a scatter of ties and ponytails and bravado. He remembered the lesson he had taught that week on primary sources. Don't tell me what someone said he had told them. Show me the document. Show me where the ink meets the paper. Show me the margin notes, the misspellings, the crease where a page was folded. He chuckled, a sound that felt both old and new. "Well, Martha," he said, "I finally gave myself the lesson." He thought about the daughter-in-law's face when the detective had asked for her phone, the split second where calculation ran out of road. He did not enjoy that memory. It did not taste like victory. He thought instead about the nurse's hand as it slid the sticky note across the counter and about Keller's scissors, and about the careful way the orderly had set the ring envelope on the desk after Keller spoke. Those were the moments that mattered, one person after another choosing to be part of the net that catches what falls. He heard the radio through the thin wall from the neighbor's house, soft music from the decade before he and Martha met. He let it play. He let his breath fall into the same slow rhythm. The lawyer would handle the letters in the morning. The bank would do what banks do when their rules are followed. The platform would blink and take the listing down, because platforms respect trouble more than truth until trouble wears a tie and shows up with an affidavit. He allowed himself. The law took my signature. I took my notebook and fought back. Morning began with the alarm and the coffee maker's steady sigh. The old man dressed like it was a school day shirt, tucked shoes, laced mindset. On the table waited the folder, timeline photos, printed emails, Ms. Keller's case number. He added an index card with the bank reference and county recorder contacts, then touched Martha's photograph on the mantel. "Watch the house," he said. His son arrived with 2 travel mugs. "Ready?" "Ready," the old man answered, slipping the folder into a plain bag and taking his cane in the right hand, the hand he used to say no. Evelyn Hart's office sat above a bakery. Hart stepped out in a navy blazer with a legal pad and calm eyes. "I record initial consults," she said, placing a small device on the table. "Accurate notes." They laid the evidence out like tools, photos of the white wristband and its cut end, the tilted notary seal, the copy of the supposed power of attorney Ms. Keller's email, placing a hold, the screenshots of the listing with owner transitioning to long-term care, and quick close. Hart arranged each piece by relevance, not drama. 3 goals, she said. 1, stop the sale. 2, void any forged authority. 3, lock your money and your person. We push all 3 today. She looked at the son. "You're here as a witness." "As his son," he said, steadying his voice. After a short menu and wait, a clerk read from the database. "Active commission," Hart repeated. "Journal entry for the date in question." She wrote while listening. "Call-in verification." No thumbprint. Location residence. Time, 3:42 p.m. Hart drew a small square around the time. "Thank you," she said, ending the call. "Hospital notes put you under observation that afternoon," she told the old man. "Facility log said background noise didn't match a hospital. The journal says residence." She dialed the notary listed on the document. The voice on the line tried for cheer and landed on strain. Hart introduced herself and recited the facts. "Do you have a scan of the journal page?" she asked. "A swallow." "I can email it," the notary said. Hart's tone stayed firm. "Please do within the hour. Also confirm what ID you inspected and whether you witnessed the signature in person." She ended the call. "We preserved the discrepancy," she said. "It matters." She drafted quickly. Affidavit of forgery. He swears the signature is not his, and he granted no power of attorney. Owner's notice and cease and desist. To the agent and platform takedown demanded pending investigation. Notice to county recorder with title alert and a prepared lis pendens, if needed. Revocation/no POA statement for the bank and Chase APS intake with a post police report draft for elder financial abuse and identity theft. Her office manager notarized the affidavit. Hart slid a pad to the son. "What you saw and heard," she said. "No guesses, no motives." He wrote, "She said she was his agent. She called the bank. She pushed long-term admission." Hart called the nursing home's compliance office, cited Ms. Keller's case number, and spoke the hold into record. The voice on the other end admitted the van had been scheduled for 10:30 as routine. "Retire that word today," Hart said. An email confirming the hold arrived moments later. She printed it and clipped it. An alert chimed on the old man's phone. "Your listing has been verified." Hart opened the screenshots, nodded once, and sent the he-owner dispute packet to the platform's legal inbox and the brokerage's designated officer CCing the agent. The bank called back fraud flag set. No changes allowed without the owner at a branch. The county recorder confirmed no transfer filed and activated deed alerts. Hart wrote the confirmation numbers on a yellow sticky and placed it like a badge on the folder. "I raised you to stand up." The old man told his son not to stand by. "I'm standing," the son answered. "With you." Hart checked the wall clock. "We have 20 minutes until that van," she said. "We go now. You to the old man will speak only what is necessary. I will do the rest." She handed him the folder. They reached the house at 10:25. A white van idled 2 doors down. A man in a polo stood with a clipboard, smiling by habit. The old man opened the voice memo app, set it to record, and slipped the phone into his shirt pocket with the mic peeking out. He stood in the doorway, cane at his side. The van rolled forward. The staffer climbed the steps. "Morning. We're here to pick up Mr. Hale for long-term admission. I do not consent to transport," the old man said clearly. "My admission is on hold. Contact patient advocate Rebecca Keller, case 1648. He held up the printed email. "Hold letter in writing. Sir, this is just to get you comfortable," the staffer tried. "We can sort the rest once you're settled." Hart stepped between the staffer and the threshold card in one hand, letter in the other. "Evelyn Hart, attorney for Mr. Hale. Any attempt to move my client without consent will be treated as unlawful restraint. Call your supervisor." On speaker, a supervisor said policy. Hart read the first line of the hold email into the phone, slow enough to become record. "I'm here to witness," she called, "if anyone needs a witness." The old man said nothing more because enough had been said. A car door thumped down the block. The daughter-in-law came up the walk wearing a bright smile. "What is this?" she asked. "We're late for transport." Hart's voice stayed level. "We have filed an affidavit of forgery with exhibits," she said. "The listing is disputed. Banking access is restricted. Any attempt to move him today will be forwarded to Adult Protective Services and the police detective assigned to elder financial abuse." The smile held, then faltered. "Detective," she repeated. Sirens approached, faint, then close. 2 firm knocks sounded at the door, not the rhythm of a neighbor. The old man opened it. 2 officers stood with a plainclothes detective. "Mr. Hale," the detective asked. "I am," the old man said. "We received an APS referral and a fraud complaint," the detective said. "We'd like to confirm identities and statements." He looked past the old man to the daughter-in-law. "Is Ms. Lang here? I'm here to help my father-in-law," she said. "This is a misunderstanding." "That may be," the detective replied. "Let's talk on the porch." He read Hart's summary, then asked for her phone. "We need to verify calls placed yesterday. You can consent or we can seek a warrant." She glanced at the van, the neighbor, the clipboard man who had found a reason to study his shoes. "This is ridiculous," she said, but she unlocked the phone. The detective matched call logs to the bank's fraud times Hart had printed, then asked one precise question. The answer tangled itself. A metal bracelet clicked. The officers spoke the words they are required to speak. Alvarez typed what she saw. The old man did not feel triumph. He felt steadiness, like a boat sliding into the dredged. The gavel struck. "The court gave me back my house. The neighbors clapped, the headlines praised, and my lawyer shook my hand. Justice on paper was mine again. But when I looked at the defense table, I saw my son, my boy who once begged me to play catch, turn his face away. Not a word, not an apology, only silence. Outside the courthouse, neighbors whispered, reporters scribbled. How could his own son do that, one woman said. William kept walking. The house was his again, but the silence at his side was louder than any verdict. If this story moved you, share it. Like, comment, and subscribe for more stories of betrayal and justice. Do you believe that truth, even if it comes late, can still be strong enough to turn an entire family upside down? Thank you for watching. The judge gave me back my house, but not my son.